What's happening, everybody? Welcome into a brand new episode of Crossed Up. Anthony Sanfilippo's here. I'm Bob Wankel. Anthony, let's just get right to it. We had our first show of the 24 season or preseason or spring training, whatever you want to call it, earlier this week. We're back now, and it's kind of crazy. Like, we went through this entire show, and we're talking about a variety of different subjects. And one of the things that we didn't really get to was Bryce Harper and everything that's going on with Bryce Harper. And it's interesting. I know that you get to mid-February, late February, and we're going to start actually seeing live baseball this weekend, which is great. It's going to be a welcome sight. But we kind of have to sink into these storylines. And if there is any little bit of drama, any little bit of uncertainty, we tend to magnify those storylines, especially this time of year, because we're not watching things of importance transpire on the field. So we get this Bryce Harper situation, and we know we saw this kind of last year. We sort of picked up on this last year. And if you've listened to the show in the past, you know that we kind of highlighted this. I remember after a game, probably May or June of last year, he sort of said, I want to play into my 40s. I want to be a Philly for life. Hopefully we can do something about that. And it was subtle, but it wasn't subtle. And then you fast forward to this offseason and we find out that it's a little bit more than subtle. Bryce Harper wants more money. And the conversation all around the city this week is like about morality of it. Like, should they pay him? Should they not? What should they do? I have a little bit of a different question, and I think it's the more important one. And we can talk about that if you want. But I think that the more important question here is, if they don't pay him, what's that going to do to this clubhouse? Like, what are the ramifications of not meeting his, I don't want to say demand, but his request? Is it important for the Phillies to pacify him, as absurd as it may be to some? Or do you think everything can kind of just be good? He'll still be model citizen, franchise player, wearing Fanatics cleats, Mr. Philadelphia, if they don't get this done?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bob. And first of all, I think that this is all very, very calculated. Bryce Harper does not say things like this publicly without it being well thought out and well, intentioned. Like where he's very direct in his intention. And I get the sense that this is something that is out there not because he wants the money right now, but because he's saying you're going to have to give it to me at some point. We still got time. We still got, 7-8 years left before this contract is up. But I'm going to deserve that money. I'm going to deserve that extension sometime before we get to that point. And I think he's just starting to lay that seed. And I think he's laying the seed because they really do believe that they have a championship caliber team in that clubhouse. And so the rationale that I put on it, the spin that I put on it is he's starting to lay the groundwork now, because if in fact they do win, he holds all the leverage, because it's like, look, man, I took that deal with no opt-outs. I committed to you. I committed to you over 13 years so that you can bring the annual average value of my contract down to something that's palatable enough for you to go out and get other great players and spend a big money on other great players. And I've been nothing but an MVP caliber player for you. So I think I deserve some kind of reward for that. And I think that that's what he's laying the groundwork for. Now, they may still give it to him even if they don't win a championship, right? If he continues to play at an MVP level for them and be the red light player that he is, in big moments, he still might get that money anyway. But I think that what he's doing is he's basically letting you know, we're going to come to a point where this conversation is going to have to happen, and you're more than likely going to have to give me the money. Otherwise, you're going to look bad. So I think that's his MO. I don't think it's like pay me now. I think it's just get ready because you're going to have to pay me.
So do you think that part of the timing of the request is sort of centered around that he is at the height of his powers? He's at the height of his popularity. He's at the arguably the height of his career, in terms of production. You think that this is a little bit harder to ask for or initiate 3 years from now if he brings it up, and maybe I don't want to say that he's certainly, I don't expect him to fall off a cliff here in terms of production, but like if he's hitting 24 home runs a year and hitting 271 for them, and he doesn't have quite the same impact in 2027, and now he's making that request, you kind of feel like that there's a element of strike while the iron's hot here for him, and he's got to at least initiate at this point, even if the demand isn't, hey, pay me by opening day.
No, absolutely. And I think that you're spot on with that. And, he is in the midst of his prime. He's 31 years old, right? So his prime probably goes another 2 seasons, and then it starts the slow decline down the other side. So yeah, of course. I mean, that's, look what I'm doing. Yeah. Look at what I've done. I basically willed this team to a World Series appearance in 22. I came back from Tommy John surgery last year faster than anyone who had ever had the surgeries ever come back. And I was such a key player to get us back to within 1 game of the World Series again. You might not give me the money today, but I'm going to be that guy this year. And we are so laser focused on finishing the job that if we do, my God, you got to give it to me. That's really what it is.
Winning a championship, I think, changes the entire dynamic here. I haven't really given a lot of thought to should they or should they not, because I think they're going to. I don't know when it happens, but I think that they're going to give him more at some point. And I guess the one other consideration I had when I sort of think through this entire thing, because there are some people out there that look at it and say, this is absurd, that this guy who got 300 million plus over 13 years, he had the ability to negotiate opt-outs. He could have dictated the terms and the back end of this contract. So there are a lot of people that are, we see this across a lot of sports. You signed a deal, that's the deal. Oh, well. I have to say, the one thing I do wonder about this entire deal is that since he's arrived here, not only has he produced, but he's done everything right. He's been everything that a Philadelphia sports fan could possibly want him to be in terms, and everything that the franchise could want him to be. He is that guy. He's got the appeal. He has that marketing juice behind him. He knows what to say. He knows how to say it. He's been in a lot of ways almost perfect here for 5 years. And he's arguably one of the most loved athletes that I can recall in the past 25 years here in this city. Is he running the risk of potentially creating some ill will and maybe creating some backlash here? Like, is he applying any, I almost feel like he's impervious to pressure. Like when you do this, like there should be some, naturally you would say like, well, he better perform now. If you're going to ask for this, you better go out and have a hell of a year. I don't even think that phases him. I really don't think that the pressure or the ask or the perception stuff is going to impact his play. But could he ultimately change the perception of how fans feel about him in a negative direction?
I mean, I think that there's always going to be some element of the fan base that will be that way. It just is, right? I mean, there's a negative element of Philadelphia fans that rears its ugly head every so often for every player, no matter how good or great of a player they are. So yeah, I do think it potentially stirs them a little bit to be a little bit more vocal than maybe they would have been. But I don't think it gets to a point. I don't think the Phillies ever let it get to a point where it starts to get ugly. You know what I'm saying?
think that's where I land on this. Like they know how important he is in so many different ways that if he cranks up the volume and the discontent to a certain degree, they know like, hey, that's where he has the leverage.
Yeah.
He knows that he has the ability to create a significant amount of influence here one way or the other. And to this point, it's been overwhelmingly positive. But I think that they want to make sure that this relationship stays intact, that they want to make sure that he remains happy. And that's why I just sort of default to, okay, maybe it's not in 24, but they're going to do this.
Yeah, there absolutely are. And listen, when I say everything is calculated, everything he says about the city of Philadelphia and how much he loves it here and how great the fans are, and talking about Chuck from Mount Airy and kissing the Phillies logo on his jersey and blowing out the 31 candles at home plate. Every one of these things is calculated, and it all adds up to exactly this. I want one more contract before I retire, and you're going to give it to me because of how much I mean to this city. I mean, there's no question. We've talked about this, Bob. He's very close to being on the Phillies Mount Rushmore of all-time players. May already be. It's close, right? And if he wins a championship, he's certainly going to make it. And there's a chance that he, by the end of his career, is right up there, either right alongside Mike Schmidt or even potentially surpassing him, depending on how much he succeeds here. So that should not be lost on everybody, that he recognizes that as well. And that is, like you said, that's his leverage. That's what he's going to lean on when the rubber meets the road. And it hasn't met it yet. Everything's still kind of happy, and hunky dory, but with all sides. But it will at some point, and that's where it's going to be most interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah, and I kind of led into this conversation by sometimes we sort of sink our teeth into these storylines or things that aren't necessarily playing out on the field right now, but I am guilty a lot of times of brushing aside these media, WIP foundational stories, like with what you see with the Eagles right now. And like, is it AJ Brown's Twitter account, or, like what happened with the Eagles? Like, I'm like, okay, like, all right, like, can we just turn the page. Right. And so sometimes I'll look at a story like the Harper situation and say like, all right, I think that this has been talked about every which way, but this does matter. Like, this is not a non-story. This is not inconsequential. Like, they have got to ensure that no matter what they decide to do in terms of the contract, that they sort of keep the peace with him and ensure that he really continues to be that positive force, good citizen, recruiter, make Philadelphia a baseball destination. Like, there's a lot at stake with keeping him happy. And that's why I do think that the story is so important, even though we didn't really get to it the other day. So you get through that, and we sort of alluded to this earlier in the week. There's not a lot of storylines coming into this season. There's not a lot of camp battles, barring injury. The way it lays out right now, we sort of think we know. We have a pretty good sense of what the opening day roster is going to be. We think we know what the lineup is mostly going to look like. We think we know what the bullpen looks like, the rotation. So there's not a lot of player A, player B. What do you want to see here? Who do you think is going to win it? What are they going to do? So let me just ask you a real general question. They start playing games tomorrow, and we're going to be excited to see. You turn on the TV, you just seeing baseball again is going to be, it's exciting for Phillies fans. Does this spring, does this February and March, does it matter at all? Like, is there anything that you specifically want to see out of this? And you can't say no injuries because that's a cop-out. Like, that's the obvious thing for this team. No injuries. But, like, is there something else that you're really dialed into here as this spring progresses?
No, that's exactly it. You got to get to the season. Whatever it takes to get to the start of this next 6 weeks, or actually not even 6 weeks, 5 weeks at this point, is going to be interminable. Like, and I'm going down there for 10 days, right? And it's going to be interminable for us to get to opening day on March 28th. Like, it's just
I cannot remember a spring where I've ever just said, just press fast forward. Who gives a shit? Really? Like, and we're hosting a Phillies podcast here. Like, I want to sell the people on the importance of the next 5 weeks and why you should listen to us talk about this team for the next 5 weeks. But my God, I mean, as everything currently sits now, and I know things can happen fast, right? Like, we went through this last spring at the end with Rhys Hoskins. It changed everything. And hopefully that does not happen to this team. But I am going to struggle, I think, come the first or second week of March to not just say, let's just look at the regular season. Let's preview the regular season. Let's find alternative ways to talk about the regular season, because I do not care that, Alec Boehm is hitting 348 this spring versus 152. Like, it does not matter. It just does not matter.
No, the only thing I guess there's a couple of small little things that you're gonna look for, right? When I go down, what am I gonna look for when I go down there? I do want to see how Johan Rojas is at the plate, right? I do. I want to
Do you think
more approach than
listen,
anything else.
I'm a big believer in if you're going to go out and play, being productive is better than not being productive. And certainly as the spring wears on, we all know the storyline the first week or two. Hey, guys might just be working on a certain pitch, might be working on hitting the ball the other way. There's like some specific element of their game that they're kind of looking to fine tune. And so I don't think you look at results at all.
No.
At some point, though, these guys go out there and play to be productive and they want to get things rolling and create that momentum going into the regular season. Okay, great. You want to see Johan Rojas. I get that. That makes sense. I think a lot of fans probably will feel that way as well. What is it that you want to see from Johan Rojas? What can he do in the next 5 weeks that makes you feel better about what he might be this season?
Yeah, I just want to see him at his approach at the plate, right? I don't want him to look like Bob. He looked lost in the playoffs, completely lost. And like I said, he doesn't need to get a bunch of hits. He just needs to have a good approach at the plate. That's all I want to see. If you show me that, and I sit there and go, okay, this dude can hit 230, and that'll be great with his superior defense in center field and bat ninth, I'm totally fine with it. Like he doesn't have to impress me. He just has to show me an approach that is like, okay, that's major league level. Great. Right. So something like that. There was a really good story. I'll give Matt Gelb a lot of credit. He wrote a nice story in the Athletic about JT Realmuto and the struggles that he went through last year on pitches on the inside. And it was really kind of interesting. Like we talked a lot about his home road splits, which were the most ridiculous home road splits I've ever seen of any player in the history of the sport. But like that was as far as the deepest we dove on it. He went a whole different level, which was great about looking at, those pitches in on his hands and how lost he was on inside pitches. He couldn't find them. He just couldn't see them. And so like therefore, like our team's throwing him inside again. Like I'm going to go down there in the couple games. He'll probably play like, all of 2 to 3 games while I'm there. Right. But what I want to see is I want to see, our team's still throwing him inside, and how is he handling those pitches? Is he still swinging through them? Is he laying off of them? Is he getting, his hands through earlier and actually making contact? Like little things like that as a baseball nerd, right? Those are things that I'm going to be looking for. But you're right. From a big picture perspective, just get to the season. Just get there. Yeah, there's a battle for the last spot on the bench. Yeah, there's a battle for the last bullpen spot probably. Beyond that stuff and beyond the little things that that we're eyeballing, just get me to March 28th.
And if I were to play the game here, if you were like, oh, come on, guys, like it's spring training. Like these games are going to be on. Well, a lot of them will be on television. Like what can we really dial in on here?
Yeah.
Okay. I agree with you. The 2 players that you just mentioned, I could find other angles. Like if I were providing you with if I were to go on Crossing Broad and say like, all right, here are 10 things to watch for this spring. Like I would get to a point in the list where I say like, can Trey Turner show me consistently when he plays this spring that he can field the baseball? Because I thought his defense last year was, and I know he made some spectacular plays in the series against the Braves, but he was dreadful defensively, and he admitted as much.
He's one of those weird dudes, man, where he's really good at the hard play, but struggles with the simple.
Really struggled with the
simple play.
Yeah. So am I like looking to just see, can he get through a spring where he looks pretty clean, or are we going to start seeing those routine mistakes again? I'd like to see him clean that up. I'd like to get a sense that, hey, this looks a little bit better. He looks a little bit more consistent, a little bit more comfortable. I do think that there is something to, as much as we talk about Bryson Stott hitting with 2 strikes, and I think that, I want to say it was maybe Alex Coffey who did a story on this. They want to try to get him a little bit more aggressive early in counts, be a little bit more successful putting the ball in play early in counts. So that's something to obviously keep an eye on as well. Sir Anthony Dominguez, we talked about him in the first show this week. Can he consistently throw his fastball for strikes, or is he going to dance around the zone and try to be too fine and then fall behind and get hurt? Like those are things that I think are real. You want to make sure the velocity's up, guys look good, but I think when you step back and say like, this is a very veteran team. Yeah. It's a very established team. It's a very big game team. I just don't know how much I can truly learn about them in March.
Yeah, no, you're 1,000% right. I'll give you one more that's kind of thrown into that whole thing is that, I don't know if you saw where they were talking about Kyle Schwarber getting to too many 2-strike counts.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, even as much as he walks and as many home runs as he hits as he's looking for the perfect pitch, they feel like, hey, we'd rather you have a somewhat higher batting average, take a few less walks, maybe hit a few fewer home runs, and just go opposite field a little bit and get that batting average up and get on base a little bit more with a hit, as opposed to with, looking for the walk, because the 2 strikes, when you get 2 strikes on you, is when you struggle. When you swing before there's 2 strikes, you actually hit like 3, whatever it was, some ridiculous number. I was like, wow, how about that? I never looked at it like that either. So that's, again, there's another little thing that you look for.
And I know that he's sort of, I love him. I do.
Yeah.
I just think, and I've said this in the past, I just think what he brings from an intangible standpoint is tremendously important. I think that he is just really gives that lineup it's some true juice. I feel that way, and I just think I just love the guy. I really do. Like from an observing standpoint, not like I have some tight relationship with him or anything. I do know though that there has to be a little bit more. Like there were times last year where we would talk about him, and I would always do the qualifier of like, I love Kyle Schwarber. I understand what he is. I understand what he isn't. All that being said, there were times where it was like, this guy, like, this is embarrassing. Like, you can't hit 172. I'm not saying he's got to go be the Cubs Schwarber where he hits 260, or I think it was when he was with maybe even the Nationals. Like he had a run where the average was like in the mid 2s, even ticking up into like the higher 2s. I'm not saying the guy's got to hit 270, but you can't hit 179 for the bulk of the regular season and then make your run at 200 late. Like that. They do have to figure that out. And I don't really want it to be at the expense of home runs, and I don't really want it to be at the expense of walks. But there is a fine line where it's like, hey, man, if we can get this guy to hit 240 and maybe he walks 7 to 10 less times, like if that's like it's not an even trade-off, but it's about the approach and just the way that you go through each at bat. And if there is an incremental gain to be made on the average where it's not killing his on base, man, like that would be nice to see. Like if they could get a little bit more consistency out of him, it would be a tremendous help.
Yeah, and I think that their thinking on it is this, Bob. If you're raising your batting average, even if you're taking fewer walks, it's not going to impact your on base percentage all that much. You're still going to get on base, but the chance of you now getting a hit, which could potentially drive in a run,
right,
as opposed to the walk, which maybe doesn't. I mean, yeah, the first at bat of the game is a little bit different than but every other time that you come up, there's a chance someone's on base. Maybe you get a single and the guy scores, or you hit a double into the gap, right? And so your home run total may drop from like 46, 48 down to 40 or 38 or whatever, but you're hitting 240, you're being more of a run producer, you're still getting on base. Like those things all, I think, equate, right? So it's one thing, yeah, and I'm a big fan of a guy with a great eye. I love it. I think it's an art form in baseball, but at the same time, you cannot hit along the Mendoza line. You have to be able to hit a little bit better than that to be a complete player in this sport.
Let me ask you this, because we're talking about making these incremental gains and sort of highlighting certain players. Can they get more out of JT Realmuto? Can they get the Johan Rojas or some version of Johan Rojas that we saw at the end of the regular season last year? Can Schwarber get a little bit better? On July 1st of last season, the Phillies were, and this is just almost impossible to believe, they were 19th in Major League Baseball in runs scored per game, averaging 4.37 runs per game. Just terrible. I mean, their offense was horrendous, and they lacked a lot of thump. I mean, there was, I believe at that point in the season, there was not one player, or maybe it was just Schwarber, who was on pace to hit like 25 home runs.
It was just 20. It was just 20. Yeah. It was just 20.
Because he got off to a slow start, and it was like, my God, like they have nothing. Like they're anemic in terms of the power through the lineup. And going into the season, you would have never thought that. But then you fast forward and you go through July, August, September, and they end up 8th in baseball in runs scored per game. So that they jump 11 spots, and they go from 4.37 runs per game to 4.9 runs per game when it's all said and done. So they're averaging over 5 runs per game for the better part of 3 months down the stretch. They're basically playing at a 100-win clip for those final 3 months. Is this a top 5 offense in terms of runs per game this season? Like, is it reasonable to kind of go big picture and just say, this is what the Phillies lineup really is. They're absolutely going to be a top 5 offense. They are the team that we saw the last 3 months of the season, not what we saw the first 3 months.
They should be. They should be a top 5 offense. I mean, they're not going to be the Braves, right? I mean, we know that. But they should be
probably not the Rangers who averaged, well over 5 runs per game last year.
Right. I mean, but and of course, the Dodgers have every superstar in baseball right now, right? So
Tampa Bay and
So I mean, you should be right in that next group.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you should be in that. I would say, in that 4 to 8 range is where they should be, and they were in it. Ultimately, is where they finished 8th last year. Might be slightly below where they belong, but I think that's right. That's right where they should fit. And yeah, they need to be better. The one thing, and I've said it repeatedly, and this is why I was a fan of the Merrifield signing, is I think that they need a little bit more. I don't want to say on base as far as, just get on base, but I think they need a little bit more of someone who goes up there with a good approach, makes contact, and finds their way on base hitting the ball.
Right.
They just lack that kind of player. Stott is like their best guy in that return, right? And every other guy in the line, maybe Marsh here and there, but every other guy is trying to, put the ball out of the ballpark. And I just wish that we had more of the, hit the ball where it's pitched, get yourself on base, and then wreak havoc from there. So that's why I was a fan of the Merrifield signing. It's the one thing I think that this team doesn't have enough of. And so you have that tendency to go through those stretches where your offense is awesome and you're putting up big runs and hitting a lot of home runs. And then at the same time, you have stretches where the offense just disappears and you're like, what the hell, man? This offense should be better. And so I think that's where the Phillies are. They need to find a way to thread that needle so that they have fewer extremes. It's a nitpicky thing, Bob, but I think it's the one thing that we, when we look at this offense and critique it, that's the one thing that's missing, or I should say missing, but lacking from this team.
All right, let me tell you one thing I want to see this spring and one thing I don't want to see. And I'll start with the one thing I don't want to see.
What's that?
I don't want to see the groins of any Major League Baseball players.
Too late. You already have.
And if you took a little spin around X or Twitter yesterday, you did see it. What a debacle. Like, listen, people from a retail standpoint sometimes have some fanatics takes, and okay, like sometimes you get something and the lettering's a little off, or maybe there's a thread sticking out of your hat, or okay, no problem. You call customer service, take a picture, you figure it out. I just can't believe that this is what they delivered to Major League Baseball teams. Like, talk about a first impression. Like, I mean, it's so bad that you have the players union involved. You actually have the commissioner's office involved looking at this. Like, it started out kind of almost like, what did they do to the nameplates on the back of the jerseys? Like, that just looks bad. That's unfortunate. It's just cheap. It's cutting a corner. And then as the thing plays out, you go like, oh my God. Like, now you're looking at the pants, and talked about it before. Like, a coach, you played softball. Like, you put some cheaper pairs of pants on, especially if you have a darker jersey, and you can sometimes see underneath. Like, you could see if you're wearing like boxers. You can see if you have a darker shirt on underneath. You can see it through the pants.
Yeah,
this is Major League Baseball, white on white, and you're seeing the threads, and you're seeing. You're seeing everything. You're seeing everything. Am I naive? I mean, I know like they're talking about the third jerseys not necessarily being in production. There could be delays on certain things. I get that. There's just this part of me though that's like, okay, the season starts in 36 days. Like, they're gonna fix this, right? Like, there's no way they're gonna go. Like, am I crazy? Like, are they going to go through an entire season with this and this look?
They can't.
It can't be, right?
It can't be. It really can't be. Now, I don't know. I'm fascinated that Fanatics and Nike have been this pathetic, and that they've permeated basically every sport. I mean, they're in with the NFL, they're in with the NHL, they're in with the NBA. Like, they're everywhere, and you don't think that this isn't just a Major League Baseball problem. Like, everybody is watching this and everybody is seeing it, and they're like, what have we
like, I
done?
understand, like, you're about efficiency, you're about obviously maximizing profit. Business is business. Like, I understand business.
Yeah.
But at some point, whatever corners you cut to do those jerseys are those gains, marginal gains, being offset by the PR disaster and the embarrassment that you've created here. I mean, it really, it's astounding. Like, if I, as a youth coach or a high school coach, opened up those uniforms and I saw that and my players looked like that, I'd be pissed.
Yeah. I'd send them all back.
That's on a youth level. That's on a high school level. I mean, think about this, man. It is crazy.
It's really bad. If it's a flashback, Bob, because I remember when we were kids, when I was a kid, and that's what our pants were like for youth ball, and you could see right through. Like, it was silly, right? And I can still remember my mother like complaining, like, why would they give you white pants? Like, give me a different color. You can see right through, see everything. And that was, in 1982. Right? Like,
it really is. This is my favorite story of spring training, because it just keeps getting worse. You see pictures coming in from all the camps. You see the writers talking about. I mean, it's amazing. It really is amazing.
And I think and I'll give you. I think the players are doing it right, where nobody has said anything positive about it, other than the athletes who are Nike athletes, right? Who have contracts with Nike. They're the only ones who said anything positive about it. But I think that the players will do good to just keep shining a light on it, because it makes baseball look bad. And we talked about Rob Manfred at the end of the last show, right? How ridiculous does he look, saying, "Oh, don't worry about it. The players are going to like these jerseys. You'll see. They'll get used to it. They're great." Like, come on, dude. Yeah. Just stop gaslighting. Just sit there and say, you know what? We think that they'll be great. We think that they'll be fine. Maybe our first run here has not gone the way we thought it should have gone, and we're gonna rectify it, and we're gonna fix it. And guess what? The story goes away, right? Right? The story goes away. But to sit there and basically say they're good, they're great,
yeah, they're good. Well, it looks like they're wearing replica jerseys.
Like, it's embarrassing. Yeah. It's embarrassing to the sport, and that's what I say, that I really don't understand. I mean, they got to be paying somebody to be like the executive vice president of marketing for Major League Baseball, right? And that guy's probably making some great six-figure salary up in the New York office. And whoever that person is, I say guy, could be a woman as well. Whoever that person is, right? That person needs to re-look at their job, because they have to sit there and say to the commissioner, you cannot say these things. Yeah. You have to identify that this is a problem with the public right now, and we need to address it from that perspective, right? We need to respond appropriately, and to be so elitist about it is asinine. It's negative. It's negative for the sport. It's bad, really bad.
I know everyone listening to this. Nobody's sitting here saying I disagree with this, and you might be saying, like, who cares? This isn't a Philly. This is a Phillies podcast. Who cares?
It affects the Phillies uniforms too.
They're bad, man. They look bad. And when you get up close to those things, in years past, you look at them and you're like, they're beautiful. Like, everything, it just looks so nice. It looks so good. And now you see these picture day photos and you're like, oh God.
Like, I mean, I'll be honest with you, because I had a couple people say to me, what the hell's because I talked about the chain stitching on the logo is not there anymore. It's gone. And people are like, oh, what does it really matter? And then you kind of explain it and show it. Like the fine detail that maybe you don't see it from afar, but when you get up close and you see it, you're like, oh wow, that does.
That's what makes a jersey special. Those little nuances and that little extra attention to detail.
Right. Yeah. That's what makes them what they are. And so to just kind of take it away and make it like basically a freaking decal is what it is. It looks.
We're a step away from screen printing here.
Yes, they're going to look like the guys out on, like you talking about softball, right? They're going to look like the guys out in Marcus Hook, right, on the softball field for me. That's what it's going to look like soon. It's terrible.
Not great. All right, I'll come back to the Phillies here real quick before we get out. I kind of floated this question to you before the show, just in terms of maybe looking ahead at the season a little bit, like we can kind of, I think every show sort of find a way to preview or discuss the regular season.
Yeah.
So I guess the question I have for you is potential surprises, maybe one positive, one negative. What do you sort of look at this year and say, I think that this player or this thing might happen and it's going to be a pleasant surprise? We'll start there.
Are we talking about just the Phillies, or are we talking about in baseball in general?
I'll open it up if you don't have anything Philly specific, but I would say if you have something that might.
Oh,
be the way
you want it to be Phillies, and that's good, and that's good. Yeah, no, I'm good with that. So a pleasant surprise for the Phillies. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to tell you that their bullpen actually is going to come together and be really, really good. I've thought about it. I've really looked at it, and I've sat there and say, I think that this group has the ability to be sensational. And what I mean, if you remember, Bob, there was a stretch at one point in the season last year. I think it was like in May and June, right, where the bullpen was just it was fantastic. It was the starters who were struggling, right, and the bullpen was actually keeping them afloat. I think that there is an ability for that group to come together and be special in this sport. And there's a reason that everybody kind of talks about them being a great group. And, even though we look at the numbers, say, well, the numbers that great. I mean, yeah, Alvarado had really good numbers, but aside from that, the rest of them, if you really look at their stats, I mean, Jeff Hoffman had a good season, but they're collectively, they were just kind of meh. But why does everybody really like the group? And I think that this is a situation where the numbers maybe lie to us a little bit. That there is a lot of really good balance, really good depth, really nasty pitches in that bullpen, and I think it's the right attitude. I think that they all have the right attitude, except for Dominguez, but I think he can get it back. If I'm going to look for one specific person that I think could be a surprise, I think it could be him. I think he's going to actually get an opportunity to close some games for this team this year. I know that seems weird, but I think that's going to be the guy who it's going to be. And because I think that's how you get him back to being what he was a couple seasons ago. I'm bullish on this bullpen this year. I think it's going to be a really strong suit for the team.
Yeah, actually, I'm right there with you, and I kind of have circled a specific player, and I know he came up the other day. I think that they're going to get more out of Gregory Soto in 24, and I'm just going to throw some numbers out there that sort of supports it. It's not just he has a really good arm. I'm surprised he didn't get the results that we sort of expected to get. It does go a little deeper. Look at his 2022 season with Detroit. He has a 3.28 ERA, all-star season. That's kind of what you thought you were getting when you acquired him. And then he pitches to a 4.62 ERA in 23. He's wildly inconsistent. He had moments, but he also had plenty of bad moments as well. Just a couple numbers here. Batting average against in 22, 225. Last year, 210. It was actually better. On base percentage in 2022, 344. Last year it was 284. OPS, 660 to 619 year over year. Better in 23 with the Phillies. His K rate actually jumped from 22.8 to 26%. His walk rate went down 12. He went from 12.9% walk rate to 8.8. Like, all of these numbers suggest that he should have been the guy that he was in Detroit, and yet he wasn't. Now, some of that is luck. There are some numbers that suggest he was the victim of poor luck, but really the one thing that you look at is that he struggled to keep the baseball in the park last year, and he went from 0.8 home run rate in 22 to 2.4 in 23. That's triple. So if he can find a way to just keep the ball in play a little bit more, I think he makes a big time jump, because I don't think he was actually as bad a season ago as the ERA would suggest.
Yeah, and that's really good pull by you, because there's a real belief in him in that team. They said it last year. I can't tell you how many times they talked about how much they liked him, even as he was struggling during the season, giving up those gopher balls. Right, there was a repeated, they do trust him in certain spots. Um, and I think that's the thing. I think you're going to look at them to build off of that, like you said. Just don't give up the home run ball.
And it's not like it wasn't like he was getting absolutely lit up. I mean, he was basically giving up a home run every 9 innings. It's not like it was a disaster, but it did feel like that there was quite a bit of damage being done, and often at inopportune times. But again, like you just go through the numbers, like the whip was down year over year. You even look at like fielding independent pitching, which I think that's a metric that I often kind of roll my eyes at, but it was identical in 22 and 23. Like there is a lot there when you take all of the numbers. Like, because sometimes what we do is we look at one thing and say, oh, see, this sort of supports my case. But when you look at everything in the complete picture, I think that there's a lot more meat on the bone with him.
Let me throw something at you, Bob. And I don't know, maybe I'm grasping at straws a little bit here, but maybe I'm not. So with a guy like Soto, obviously, who throws as hard as he does, how much has the ability for these hitters to go back into the into the cage underground underneath the stadium in game, okay, and face off against that, AI, basically it's an AI version of the pitcher that they're about to go face. Right. And so now all of a sudden you got, oh, Gregory Soto is going to come in. Let's go back air and swing against, a couple swings against Gregory Soto, see what that fastball looks like. Right. How much is that impacting pitchers who throw a certain way, who aren't, up there surgically picking you apart with stuff, right? Who are just throwing gas, and then you're able to identify it, a little bit more, and you're not coming in. It's not as much of a surprise or a change of pace from the previous pitcher that was in the game, right? Because you're now prepared for it. How much of that is really impacting these pitchers when it comes to giving up home runs? Because I think, the home run rate was obviously up across the league last year.
Yeah, I think that there might be something to that. It's sort of, especially when you're a guy like Soto gives you a little bit of an uncomfortable look. I think that the more familiarity, the more acclimation that you can get against looks like that, I think it probably, I don't want to say levels the playing field, but I think it probably does give an advantage to the hitter. I am amazed though. Like the more and more, even as we're talking through this, like I just pulled up StatCast and I go, okay, like what about his velocity? Was it down? No. It's 98.3 miles per hour average fastball last year. It was 98.4 the year prior. You look at expected ERA at StatCast. His expected ERA with the Tigers in 22 was 4.08. It was 2.84 last year. Mm-hmm. I mean, hard hit percentage dropped from 43% to 34%. Like everything about this just screams bounce back year. So I don't even want to say it would be a pleasant surprise. I mean, I think that they went out to get this guy to be a late inning option, a viable guy that you could depend on late in games for big outs. So I don't want to say it's a surprise, but I think you're going to get that bounce back from him.
Yeah, I think it was one of those things with Soto last year, Bob. It's like an offensive lineman in football, where if you're not talking about him, he's doing his job. And so the games when he would come in and have a good appearance, we're not sitting there going, "Hey, great job, Gregory Soto."
Right.
We're only identifying when Gregory Soto
That's
has.
What you were supposed to do.
Yeah, like we're only identifying Gregory Soto when he has a bad game, right, or gives up that home run. Like, oh, there goes Soto again. But in fact, there were other appearances that were pretty solid that were mixed in, and we just didn't say anything about it.
You saw flashes and sometimes even extended flashes of what he can be.
Yeah.
Anything that you're looking at, this is a time of year where everybody's optimistic. Everybody kind of expects this team to be really good, and I think it will be. Anything you're looking at, though, where you're like, could be a problem.
What happens, Bob, if Alec Boehm doesn't take that next step yet again?
Yeah.
What do you do? What do you do?
I mean, are you okay with him just sort of rolling over his production from year to year? Like, would you just take that player?
I still think that there needs to be a little bit more. I'm not opposed to having.
I mean, I'll answer your question. If that's what happens, you're calling somebody in July.
Right? I mean,
and I personally, we're on record here. I would have advocated for that a year ago.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
I know there are a lot of Alec Boehm. Like he's you guys you don't see the beauty of the game. I think he's fine. I do. I think he's a fine player. I just wish there was a little bit more there. disappointed there's not a little bit more there.
Yeah. I think that
Hate anyway.
I think it especially bothered me later in the year when he was struggling, right? Going in, I think in the playoffs and stuff, and it's not, to me, it's not about where he's at in the lineup, because he wouldn't have hit if he was further down in the lineup either. Like, it wouldn't matter. They ran into what they ran into, and they all went cold at the same time. But it's the reality of the fact that, there should be more to his game that there's not, especially with his frame. Like, there's an approach at the plate that I like with him, but I also think that he becomes such a he wears the blinders because he doesn't change anything when he could, and to make it even a little bit better.
Is there? He's 27. Is there a possibility that there's still some room for growth in his game?
I think this is it. I mean, this is the last chance, right? I mean, if this season you don't grow that last little bit, this is who you are. And it's a fine major league player. I mean, it's not like you just said. He's a good player, but is he ever going to be more than a 1.5 to 2 WAR per season player? Like, to me, that's the thing where you want him to take that next step. Like, we're talking about guys who can give you a little bit more of that, find a way on base with your bat kind of thing. He's a guy that I look at and say he should be able to do it. He should be a guy who goes up there, can hit the ball the other way, can just drive the ball a little bit more.
I'm with
home run rate a little bit.
I'm with you. In fairness to him, he did almost knock in 100 runs last year. He often was one of their better hitters in key spots.
Yeah.
We talk about this team sometimes being inconsistent, being so reliant on the home run. He sort of was a little bit of a stabilizing presence in that all you needed was contact at points, and he could provide that for you. You just go through the month-to-month numbers, though. And like, he really got real hot in July, hit 337 in 25 games. And I think when you look at his overall numbers, man, like, you see that he hit 274 last year with 20 homers. It was really on the strength of that July, with a 916 OPS over 25 games. And you look at August, September, and then the bleed over into October, like, he did hit 10 home runs the final 2 months of the season. You said it, like, this is probably the last year. And I'm not saying he needs to be 30, 35 home run guy, but just take one more step, become that 25 home run guy, become a 30, 40s doubles guy. Like, just hit 270, just show a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because the problem that you run into, and like, I know everybody, like, one of the big stories that everyone kind of latches onto is like, oh, well, he's really become a quality defender. No, he hasn't.
No, he's become an acceptable defender.
He's become playable, and credit to him, because where he was and where he was at, both in terms of just making plays and where he was at mentally, I give him credit. Like, I do think that he deserves credit for overcoming that and becoming playable. But this idea that, like, he's a very serviceable, has even become a quasi dependable fielder, like, I don't know about that, man. Like, that to me is a big stretch, and the numbers don't bear that out whatsoever.
They don't. Like that's the one for me, Bob. And I'm just, I want to see him get better, because I think that there is another level that he can reach. I do, but I'm also concerned that he doesn't get there.
Yeah.
And that's,
I will say, like, I think my concern with him is more in that I could see there being room for regression. Like,
well, that's the red flag, right?
That's what would concern me. Like, if you give me, 108 OPS plus, 765 OPS, on base percentage about 330, like, I can live with all that. Like, I can even live with the relative. He took a little bit of a step forward with the power, 20 home runs. I can live with that, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I do think that there could be a step backwards here. I do. I'm not counting on that, but I would not be surprised either.
Let's be honest, right? Not every player is going to have a better year than last year. Okay? Not every player is.
Right.
There's going to have to be a couple guys that...
Yeah, not everyone altogether, 26 people at a time, takes a step forward.
Right. Yes. There have to be players that come backwards a little bit. and I look at this group and I say, who has the greatest likelihood of being someone who can step back from what they did a season ago? And I think that Alec Bohm is at the top of that list. And that's not a negative about him. It's not saying that he stinks or anything like that. I think he's a good player. I just think that there is a thing where I'm a little bit worried that we may have seen his peak.
Well, I can't wait to have our first Nick Castellanos conversation of the season. We're not going to do that right now because I think we can just dedicate entire episodes to what he's got going on. But
I think maybe we should wait until after I talk to him down in spring training again this year.
Your guy, the number one news source for Nick Castellanos information. So, all right. Well, why don't we hit one last thing and wrap this up?
Yeah, one last thing, and I'm going to keep it local in a sense. You saw the Mike Trout story this week, right? We didn't. I think it came out after we recorded earlier this week, so I didn't miss it on the last episode.
Wants to win it all with the Angels.
He does, and he's got this loyalty thing. But he did have some interesting quotes, though, Bob, basically where he's talked about how there are players who want to come to the Angels. He's talked to them directly, kind of served as his own little bit of a recruiting effort to try and get players to go there. And he basically put it in the owner, Artie Moreno's hands, and said it's up to Artie to get it done at this point. And he also talked about the potential for, leaving when, maybe down the road if things don't go the way he wants them to go, then maybe he would reconsider leaving Anaheim and Los Angeles. It used to be Anaheim, but they're still playing Anaheim. They don't call him that. Anyway, point being, I feel like a lot of people are giving him a hard time for what he said. And I feel like this is the first time we've actually heard Mike Trout express I want to be here, but if you don't do it, then I'm going to look to get out. And I think this is the very first time he's ever kind of said that. And I want to sit here and say applause to Mike Trout because, one, you don't get a lot of players who are loyal to a team, right, for a long time. And so you give him credit for that. But at the same time, realizing his situation, saying to the organization, you've failed me to this point. I'm giving you one last chance. And then maybe we can go forward. I think what Mike Trout said, I'm going to take the opposite view than most people. And I think that he actually, I applaud him for the way he said, said what he said for with the Angels.
I think it's inevitable that he leaves there. I do. I think that he is mindful of loyalty and trying to finish what he started. I just think that it has reached a point where he knows that his best days are coming to an end and that it's like we talked about with Bryce Harper. There's like a sense of we need to capitalize on the moment. I think that he's at a crossroads in his career with all the injuries that he's dealt with. I think he knows that, hey, this isn't going to last forever. I gotta win. I want to win. This is sort of like the last opportunity for you guys to show me that we can do it here. And I don't know what he's expecting because I don't see a whole hell of a lot out there. I don't expect the Angels to be, I think they're okay, but I just don't like, what's the timeline here? Is he giving them 2 more years? Is he giving them 3 months to prove they're a contender this year? I don't know, man.
Yeah. Well, I'll throw one other thing kind of tying into this. How about Anthony Rendon saying that baseball's not a priority?
Yeah, I know that this has been a big story, and first of all, I think that this is Anthony Rendon. Like, I think that there's enough body here to suggest that this guy doesn't really prioritize the game the way that some do. If a guy tells me that my priority is my family, I say, of course it is. Yeah. And so you could see a world where maybe his comments get taken out of context. But given how miserable he's been to the media or with the media, and this isn't like a pro media thing, but like he's made it very clear that he's fucking annoyed by the entire thing and has been for a long time. And so he knows what he's saying and he knows the way that those words are going to be construed. And I think that there was a certain level of intention behind those words. So I think it's absolutely justified to crush him for what he said. The guy is an all-time loser. Like, he's also a millionaire 100 times over, 200 times over. But just in terms of like, talk about clubhouse guys, like vibes, chemistry. What the hell kind of chemistry is that? I mean, what is that?
Yeah, and it's a shame too, because when you go back to when he was with Washington before he became the 200 times over millionaire. you know he had a
He's
little bit of
great player.
yeah, he's got a little bit of that dog in him before, like he can get there
Yeah.
if he really wants to. And it's just like, to me, it's a slap in the face. Like, it's almost like, all right, you gave me all this money and I have no interest now anymore.
Yeah.
I did what I had to do. I made my life and my family's, lives forever. And just pay me and I'll just kind of meander through. Like, it's kind of pathetic. It's kind of pathetic.
Are we doing a thing here in July when, we just talked about the Yamamoto contract and that the Phillies were all in on him? And, there's this idea that, well, you didn't spend it there, but you might spend it eventually. Like, are we going to be doing okay, that happened and Trout's not happy and they're not winning? Are we going to do the Mike Trout conversation again this summer?
We started this whole show talking about how intentional Bryce Harper is with everything he says. And let's not forget, there was one time where he talked about trying to convince Mike Trout to come to Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I will never say never. I don't think it happens. I don't think it does. If you're asking me, Anthony, do you think it? But I will never say never with Harper. So,
all right,
it's possible. There's a possibility.
Like ending a podcast with a little Mike Trout talk. So get everybody all
worked
fired
up, right?
up. Yeah, all worked up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week. We'll finally have some games to look at. I don't know if we'll even talk about them. Hopefully, we're not talking about these games. If next week, if we're talking about the games over the weekend in any meaningful capacity, something bad has probably happened.
Maybe we'll see Mick Abel throw an inning or two, right?
Yeah,
and maybe we'll get a little look at him.
That would be good.
Things.
That would be good. Yeah. All right. Very good. All right. Well, for Anthony Sanfilippo, I'm Bob Wankel. You follow Anthony on Twitter/X at AntSanPhilly. You can follow me at Bob_Wankel. Make sure that you're checking out Crossed Up YouTube, anywhere that you get your podcasts, and we'll talk to you soon.